3,000. I'm about to take out the spark plugs on this side and do a compression test. But if I just crank it, you can hear it has a low cylinder. At least one cylinder. Okay, so that's 80 psi in the cylinder. I still don't really hear anything coming through the intake. Bottom end, there's some blow by you can hear. But that exhaust is leaking a lot. I can feel it. And I loosened the rockers. And these things are now loose. They're not pushing the valve down at all. So I think I've got a bad cylinder head here. That back exhaust valve's leaking, at least on this side. So I think at this point I may start taking it apart to the point to put different heads on it or fix these off the truck. I found one of the problems when I did the valve stem seals the last time. I apparently missed the lifter with a push rod, so that explains why I had a dead miss, but it doesn't really explain the oil consumption still, but this does. If you look in there, a pool of oil on top of the valve. I've already scraped these cylinders, but they were pretty carboned up for such a short time. You can see all that buildup down there. I haven't totally decided how I'm gonna get around this problem, but I'm pretty sure that this smoking problem exists in the top end and not the bottom end. But I've got it all taken apart for inspection, and there's just oil everywhere. There's oil inside the plenum. There's oil all in the combustion chambers. Plugs are fouled out. These things only have about 3,000 miles, and you can see just the level of carbon that's built up. And it's even on the back of the intake valves. Turbos look good. They're nice and black, but not any liquid oil. Just soot. And here is the brains that makes the coil pack setup possible. So I'll go over this next. Show you how I made this work. This is a stock Explorer fuel injection. I've had probably every year Explorer ECU running this truck at some point, and a 98 Mustang manual while I was working on tuning it. You can see there's a stray wire right here. That's because there used to be a 3-plug Hall effect on the earlier ones. This one's a VR, and I'll show you what I had to do to make it work with a 351 Windsor to use this harness, which is a returnless harness. It's out of a 2000, I think, application, 99 or 2000 Explorer. So these are camshaft synchronizers. This one I custom made out of a lower drive off of a 351 Windsor distributor. These are bigger on the oil pump drive side than the 302, so you can't just use a 302. This is what the Explorer uses and other late model Fords for sequential injection and coil packs. So if you want to get rid of the distributor or run the newer ECU, this is what you have to make or buy. And this one I made. I took it apart and it's seized up. This time's a good thing I took it apart, because it seems that this bushing inside here is crabbing, and I don't know exactly what's wrong with it, but I need to make a new one. So this one right here is out of a 2000 Mustang V6 3.8. It has the same diameter oil pump drive shaft, but it's a different length. You can see here, if you were to line them up, this thing will not fit into the block because this housing's different. So what I plan to do is take this shaft and gear and swap it into the Explorer housing to replace this one. The only issue is that you can see the original distributor drive is actually longer, so it gets a little more engagement on the oil pump drive shaft. The 3.8 is shorter. I don't know if that's going to be an issue or not, but I'm going to work with what I got. Either way, it's better than this one because this one's totally failed and completely seized. I sprayed it with WD-40 and could still barely get it to turn. And when I took this thing apart, the cam sync was totally turned like this because it's so much resistance it actually spun. It's supposed to sit looking at you like this with the plug towards the front, and when I took it apart it was turned like that, obviously because of the resistance. It had slipped here. So this is probably the first project I'm going to tackle. I believe it was 1999 or 98 Ford switched from this 3-wire to a 2-wire. This was pretty uniform across most of the engines. The 3.8, 5.0. Obviously the 5.8 haven't never had one of these from the factory, so here's the finished product. This is the old one on the right that has seized up internally, and this is the new one I made to replace it using those Mustang parts I talked about. Here is the earlier shaft off of a 302, and you can see the size difference on the oil pump drive. This diameter is quite a bit smaller than that, which is where the problem comes from. You also see the difference in engagement between what the 351 Windsor distributor does versus the 3.8. I don't know if this is going to be an issue or not. I don't think so, but just another look in here. Two differences between, it's not just the sensor, it's also the shaft pattern's different. So there's this single small tooth versus a kind of half moon deal. So that's what's left over. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that this piece was actually off of the 302 cam gear and not the 3.8. So I tried the 3.8 one first after marking it and found out that the roll pin was on the bottom instead of the top. And also both of these two items are keyed, and if you don't put them in right, the roll pin will line up with the shaft on one side. When you turn it over on the other, there's a misalignment of half, which is partially why I had to weld this one, is because I didn't pay attention to that. So if you're doing this, pay attention. These things have to go on one way. They're actually drilled a certain direction so that the shaft, the gear, and this spacer all line up appropriately. Just dropped a new head gasket on that side, getting ready to torque down this head. Cleaned off those pistons again, wiped the surface down with brake parts cleaner, cleaned it with a Scotch-Brite. These are the head gaskets I use. Felpro 9333 PT1s. These are the same ones I had on the 302. I've never had one of these blow yet, but I have had one of these factory ones fail. Right here on the front where the oil and coolant passages are next to each other, this blew between them and pumped coolant into the oil. So I had disappearing coolant, ended up in the oil pan, and took out the lower end bearings, but these are the heads that are on it. These are the heads that are going on today. These are E7TE iron heads, factory heads, nothing done to them. Iron head, 53.2. It's the aluminum head with rockers, 29. Just like the Explorer manifolds, people really don't seem to like these iron heads. Probably because of the exhaust side, the ports are really small. You can see compared to those aluminum heads that I've got, but nothing a few pounds of boost can't fix. So as long as they're not smoking like these other heads were, then I think that'll work. They do have smaller exhaust valves, smaller intake valves, and weaker springs, but passenger side iron head is installed. Gonna put that driver's side together and fire it up today. Turbo and everything bolted on, but unfortunately this distance is different than the other heads, so I'm gonna have to make a new support bracket to go from the manifold to there. It's all back together now, and this is gonna be the first start. Hopefully no surprises. A little bit of coolant on the ground from the radiator from filling it, but